She thought she would marry a deaf millionaire. But what happened at the wedding left her stunned. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The wedding hall shimmered under hundreds of golden lights, crystal chandeliers reflecting on polished marble floors. Guests whispered in awe at the opulence, but their eyes always drifted back to the young woman standing at the center of it all. Ella clutched the bouquet so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Her veil framed a face that was both delicate and determined. Though her heart raced so loudly she feared the entire room could hear it. Across from her stood Alexander, the man she had agreed to marry. To the world, he was a mysterious millionaire, a man of wealth and power, whose name commanded attention in every boardroom. To her, he was a contract. 1 year of marriage in exchange for her family's freedom from crushing debt. 1 year of playing the role of his wife in front of cameras, investors, and society's hungry eyes. The papers had been signed, the terms had been sealed, and her life had been traded for survival. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, speculation filling the air. "She is just another gold digger," some whispered. "Look at her dress. She must have begged him to buy it." Every word cut Ella like shards of glass, yet she forced her chin higher. Dignity was the only weapon she had left. And then, there was the secret everyone believed about Alexander. The man the world thought was deaf. He never spoke in public, always communicating through assistants and interpreters, keeping his voice hidden as though it were locked away. Rumor painted him as cold, unreachable, even dangerous. Yet, as he turned his head toward Ella, his gaze was steady, unreadable, and strangely protective. The officiant cleared his throat, calling the room to silence. "Do you, Alexander, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" He did not answer immediately. The silence stretched, long and heavy. A translator stepped forward, ready to sign his response. Cameras flashed. The guests leaned forward, hungry for drama. Ella's breath caught. Was he hesitating? Was he about to call the entire charade off? Finally, he nodded once. The translator signed his consent, and the room exhaled in relief. The deal was sealed. For everyone watching, it was a spectacle. For Ella, it was the beginning of a prison sentence dressed in silk and lace. She stole a glance at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was carved from stone. She remembered the document she had signed, the one that promised her family's debts would vanish after 12 months. 12 months of pretending. 12 months of enduring the whispers, the cold looks, the staged smiles for cameras. Her entire future had been traded for survival, and there was no turning back now. As the ceremony continued, Ella's mind wandered to her mother's frail body lying in a hospital bed. It was the only reason she had agreed to this marriage. The cost of treatment was beyond anything she could ever dream of affording. Alexander's offer had been her last chance, and though it felt like shackles, it was shackles she willingly clasped on for the sake of the woman who raised her. The guests erupted in polite applause as the officiant declared them husband and wife. Alexander extended his hand. For a moment, Ella hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his. His touch was firm, steady, almost reassuring, yet she could not forget this was no fairy tale. This was a transaction, and transactions always came with a price. Behind the flashes of cameras and the applause of strangers, a storm was already brewing. Ella had no idea that the wedding, which was supposed to mark the start of her silent suffering, would instead unravel secrets that would shock the entire room. And the man she thought she knew, the deaf millionaire who had just become her husband, was hiding a truth that would leave her stunned. The applause from the wedding still echoed in Ella's ears long after the ceremony ended. She moved through the reception hall like a porcelain doll, smiling when expected, bowing her head politely, and letting herself be photographed beside her new husband. Every chandelier sparkled above, every glass of champagne shimmered, but to her the entire evening felt like walking on a tightrope. She knew the contract was binding, and her family's future now rested on her ability to endure this masquerade for 12 full months. Alexander remained calm, almost detached. He allowed others to approach, shook hands with powerful men in tailored suits, and nodded at the women who greeted him with painted smiles. Not once did he speak. His interpreter shadowed him closely, signing his responses and translating his rare gestures. To the crowd, he was the perfect enigma, a wealthy man sealed inside a world of silence. To Ella, he was the man whose signature had freed her family from financial ruin, yet also the man who held her fate like a chain. Her relatives sat at a far corner table, overwhelmed by the grandeur. Her younger brother whispered excitedly about the luxury cars parked outside. Her mother, too frail to attend, was lying in St. Mary's Hospital, fighting illness. Ella's father clasped her hand earlier that morning and whispered, "Do not look back, daughter. This is our only way out." That memory burned like fire in her chest. As the night wore on, Ella overheard the murmurs around her. "She is a nobody," one woman sneered behind a jeweled fan. "She is not from our world." Another voice, sharper, added, "He chose her only because no woman of status would bind herself to a deaf man." The laughter that followed was thin and cruel. Ella forced her lips into a smile, but her heart trembled. When the first dance began, Alexander extended his hand toward her. For a fleeting second she hesitated. Then she placed her palm in his. The music swelled, soft and deliberate, and the two of them moved under the lights. His hand rested on her waist, steady, guiding her steps as though he had done this countless times before. She lifted her eyes to him, searching for any crack in his mask, but found none. "Do you hate this as much as I do?" she whispered under her breath, knowing he would not respond. Or perhaps he heard her and chose silence. The thought unsettled her. His eyes lingered on her for a moment, unreadable. Then he turned his gaze away, as if retreating back into his fortress of quiet. The evening stretched endlessly. Each congratulation, each toast, each shallow smile, layering another weight upon her shoulders. The contract was clear. She must play the role of the perfect wife, smile at his side, and never let the public see the truth. And so she endured, not for herself, but for her mother's chance to live, for her brother's chance to go to school without shame, for her father's weary soul to breathe without the chains of debt. Later that night, when the guests had begun to leave and the hall dimmed, Ella caught sight of herself in a tall mirror. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger, a young bride draped in silk and diamonds, standing beside a man whose face revealed nothing. Her chest tightened as a single thought echoed inside her mind. This was not love. This was survival, dressed as marriage. And though the contract promised freedom after 1 year, Ella feared that the cost of enduring might be far greater than she had ever imagined. She did not know it yet, but every cruel whisper, every staged smile, every forced dance was building toward a revelation that would shake the very ground beneath her feet. The truth about her husband, the so-called deaf millionaire, would not remain hidden forever. And when it came to light, the world would not be the only one left stunned. Ella herself would have to face a choice that could change everything. The mansion where Ella now lived stood like a fortress at the edge of the city, its towering gates and marble columns announcing wealth that could silence anyone who doubted Alexander's power. To the world, she was now Mrs. Alexander, the young bride who had stepped into luxury. To herself, she was a woman bound by paper and obligation. The first days after the wedding felt like walking through a museum where she was the only living exhibit. Servants bowed politely, but kept their distance. Every room glistened with crystal and gold, yet the silence was heavier than stone. Alexander moved through the halls with the precision of a man who had lived this way his entire life, untouchable, untamed, and unreachable. On their third evening, Ella found him in the library, seated beneath shelves of leather-bound books. A fire flickered behind him, casting shadows across his face. She stood in the doorway, clutching the edge of her shawl, unsure if she should enter. "This house is too large," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "It feels like it could swallow me whole." He did not respond. His eyes scanned the paper in front of him, and the interpreter who always followed him was nowhere in sight. Ella's words vanished into the silence. She sighed and turned away, but just as she reached the door, she felt his gaze on her back. She did not dare look, afraid of what she might see. The contract ruled every interaction. She was to appear with him at events, to smile at his side, to project the image of a devoted wife. At night, she slept in a grand room down the hall from his, a space filled with silk sheets and diamond-studded lamps, yet it felt colder than any place she had ever known. Her thoughts often drifted to her mother. She visited St. Mary's Hospital whenever she could, arriving with flowers or a sketchbook full of drawings to keep her mother's spirits alive. Each time, her mother grasped her hand weakly and whispered, "Endure it, Ella. 1 year will pass quickly." Her brother, still too young to understand the weight of sacrifice, only smiled proudly whenever he saw her in photographs beside Alexander. But the whispers outside the mansion walls grew louder. Magazines printed headlines like, "The Mysterious Bride of the Deaf Millionaire," and "From Poverty to Diamonds, Who is Ella?" Gossip painted her as nothing more than a woman who had sold her soul for money. One evening, as she returned from the hospital, she passed a group of reporters stationed at the gate. Their questions pierced the night air. Did you marry him for his fortune? Do you love him, or is this just an arrangement? Is it true you were drowning in debt before the marriage? Their flashbulbs blinded her, their words stabbed her, but she pressed forward, head held high. Inside the house, she collapsed against the door, heart pounding. That was when Alexander appeared in the hallway, watching her silently. His eyes lingered on the trembling of her hands, the tears she tried to hide. For a moment, she thought he might approach her, that he might say something, anything. But instead, he turned away, retreating once more into silence. That night, Ella sat at her vanity, sketchbook open, pencil moving across the page. Without meaning to, she drew him his sharp jawline, his steady eyes, his expression carved in stone. When she realized what she had done, she closed the book quickly, ashamed of her own heart betraying her. She whispered into the stillness, "What are you hiding, Alexander? What is buried behind that silence?" The mansion gave no answer, yet deep within its marble walls, secrets waited. Secrets that would one day rip through the contract and reveal the truth about the man she now called husband. And Ella, though she did not yet know it, was standing at the edge of a storm that would test not just her endurance, but her very soul. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the mansion, spilling across the polished floors. Days had turned into weeks, and Ella's new life unfolded like a carefully written script. Every step, every smile, every gesture was guided by the terms of the contract. Yet beneath the surface of obligation, moments began to emerge that unsettled her heart. One afternoon, as she carried a tray of tea toward the garden, her heel caught on the edge of the stone path. The porcelain cups rattled, and for a terrifying instant she braced for the crash. But a firm hand reached out, steadying her before she fell. Alexander's grip was strong, protective, and far warmer than she expected. Their eyes met briefly. His face remained unreadable, but in that fleeting moment she sensed something more than silence. Without a word, he released her and walked away, leaving her shaken by the unspoken connection. Later that week, Ella returned from St. Mary's Hospital carrying medicine for her mother. She placed it on the nightstand in her room, only to discover another identical package already waiting there. A receipt lay tucked beneath it, bearing Alexander's name. She stood frozen, staring at the evidence. He had gone out of his way to ensure her mother's care, yet he had never mentioned it. Her chest tightened. Why would a man who claimed indifference bother with such kindness? Evenings in the mansion grew heavy with quiet. To distract herself, Ella often sat by the window with her sketchbook, capturing the outlines of roses in the garden or the sweeping lines of the city skyline. One night, as she sketched absent-mindedly, her pencil moved again toward Alexander's likeness. When the drawing was complete, she tore the page out and tucked it beneath a stack of books, ashamed that her heart betrayed the role she was supposed to play. But fate had a way of weaving threads together. A few days later, while searching the study for a misplaced letter, Alexander stumbled upon her sketch. He held the paper in silence, studying the lines she had drawn. When Ella entered and saw him holding it, her face flushed. She rushed forward to snatch it back, but he did not resist. Instead, he placed the paper gently on the desk and gave her a long, unreadable look before turning away. That night, Ella lay awake in her vast, cold bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the small moments, the steady hand that caught her, the medicine purchased without a word, the silent gaze when he saw her drawing. She tried to remind herself of the contract, of the 1 year she was bound to endure. Yet her heart whispered questions she dared not voice. At a charity gala soon after, the tension grew sharper. Ella walked at Alexander's side, cameras flashing as they entered the grand ballroom. Whispers followed them, cruel as ever. "She does not belong here," someone hissed. "She is nothing but a pretty face." The words stung, but she kept her chin high. When her foot faltered on the marble stair, Alexander's hand tightened around hers, steadying her once more. For the first time, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, a spark of protectiveness he could not hide. As the evening ended, Ella stood beside him on the balcony, the city lights glittering below. She dared to speak softly. "Why do you help me in silence? Why not just say something? Anything?" He looked at her, his expression shadowed by the night. No answer came. Only the weight of his gaze, lingering long enough to stir the deepest corners of her heart. Ella turned away, fighting the storm inside her. She had promised herself she would not forget the truth. This was a marriage of survival, not love. And yet, with every passing day, the lines blurred. What had begun as a performance was quietly becoming something she could not name. And somewhere deep inside, she feared the cost of such feelings would be far greater than she was prepared to pay. The fragile balance Ella had managed to maintain began to shatter one gray afternoon when the world outside the mansion turned vicious. Headlines splashed across magazines and websites with cruel certainty: "The gold digger bride of the deaf millionaire." Photographs of Ella at the charity gala were plastered everywhere, her smile dissected, her gown mocked, her background dragged into the spotlight. They wrote of her family's debts, of her mother's long stay in St. Mary's Hospital, of every weakness they could find. Ella sat in the drawing room, clutching a newspaper in trembling hands. Her chest burned as if every cruel word had been carved onto her heart. She whispered into the silence, "Is this all I am to them? A transaction? A joke?" When Alexander entered the room, she looked up with desperate hope. She wanted him to deny the lies, to silence the rumors, to say one word in her defense. But he did not. He stood still, his face unreadable, and let the silence answer for him. The weight of it pressed harder than any insult. Her voice broke as she asked, "Do you see me as they do? Am I only a contract to you?" But Alexander turned away, offering no reply. His silence cut deeper than any accusation. That night, Ella could not bear the glittering mansion. She fled to her mother's bedside at the hospital, pressing her forehead to the cool sheets, trying to hold back the storm of tears. "Mother," she whispered, "I thought I could endure this, but I am breaking." Her mother's weak hand reached for hers, but even her comfort could not heal the hollow ache inside. When Ella returned to the mansion, the whispers of the staff confirmed what she already knew. Rumors had spread like wildfire, tearing through the walls of the estate. Servants eyed her with suspicion. Society doors closed tighter than ever, and the cruel laughter of strangers echoed in her mind. Days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Alexander's distance became unbearable. He was present, yet absent, a shadow moving beside her but never reaching out. The man who had once steadied her hand on the ballroom stairs, who had purchased medicine for her mother in silence, now felt impossibly far away. In the solitude of her room, Ella stared at her reflection in the mirror. She no longer recognized the woman staring back. The gown, the jewels, the mansion, all of it felt like a cage. "I am not your wife," she whispered to the empty air. "I am your prisoner." The tension reached its breaking point when another scandal erupted. A rival of Alexander spread the cruelest rumor yet that Ella was never truly his choice, that she had forced him into marriage by leveraging her family's debt. The accusation spread like fire, poisoning every conversation. At a society gathering, a group of women cornered her, their words sharp as knives. "You are nothing but a fraud," one sneered. "You have no place here." Ella's chest tightened, her throat ached, but she stood her ground. Yet when she turned to seek Alexander's presence, he was across the room, his expression carved in stone, offering no shield against the storm. In that moment, the contract felt heavier than iron chains. The man she was bound to by law and paper was letting her drown before the world's eyes. And deep inside, Ella felt the first spark of something dangerous doubt, not just in her marriage but in herself. The line between survival and destruction blurred, and she began to wonder if enduring 1 year of silence would destroy her long before the contract ever ended. The weeks of whispers and humiliation built toward a storm Ella could never have imagined. It came on the day of their most public celebration, the grand reception meant to solidify Alexander's image as a powerful husband and to quiet the cruel rumors. The ballroom was filled with society's elite, their eyes sharp with judgment, their tongues ready to slice. Ella walked into the hall beside Alexander, her gown glimmering under the chandeliers, but her heart weighed like stone. She moved through the night like a shadow, smiling where she must, enduring the sting of whispers that followed every step. Her mind replayed the headlines, the accusations, the silence of the man beside her. The moment of collapse came suddenly. As Ella lifted her glass for a toast, a rival of Alexander stepped forward. His voice boomed across the hall, dripping with mockery. "Is this your wife, Alexander? The girl who bought your fortune with her family's debt? How pathetic, a deaf millionaire forced to take pity on a beggar." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, hungry to capture her shame. Ella's throat closed, her vision blurred. She could feel the walls of humiliation closing in, every cruel word echoing louder and louder. She thought Alexander would do as he always had, stand in silence, shielded by his interpreter. But then, the unthinkable happened. Alexander stepped forward, his gaze burning with intensity. And for the first time in front of them all, he spoke. His voice was deep, steady, and clear. "That is enough." The hall froze. The rival's smirk faltered. Every guest fell into stunned silence, eyes wide with shock. Alexander's voice carried through the grand chamber, undeniable and powerful. He repeated, "That is enough." Ella's heart stopped. The world had believed him deaf. She herself had accepted his silence as truth. Yet here he was, speaking with perfect clarity, his words shattering the lie that had bound her life. Gasps filled the air. He can speak? He is not deaf? The crowd erupted into chaos, reporters fumbling for cameras, guests clutching pearls. Alexander did not waver. He turned toward Ella, his expression unreadable, yet filled with something raw and unguarded. "I was never deaf," he declared, his voice resonating against the marble walls. "I allowed the world to believe it because silence was easier than lies, easier than deception. But tonight, when you insult her, you insult me." Ella could not breathe. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. The man she had married, the man who had kept her caged in silence, had been hiding not just his voice, but his entire truth. Her chest burned with betrayal. Every moment of loneliness, every cruel headline, every whispered insult she had endured, crashed against her heart. He had let her suffer, all while holding a secret that could have changed everything. The rival retreated, his face pale, but Ella did not see him. All she could see was Alexander, the husband she thought she knew, the stranger who had just spoken the words that shattered her world. The applause came, hesitant at first, then swelling as the crowd processed what they had witnessed. But Ella heard none of it. She turned, her veil brushing against her shoulders, and fled from the hall. Her footsteps echoed through the marble corridors, her breath ragged, her tears blinding. Behind her, Alexander's voice called out, no longer silent, no longer hidden. But she did not stop. The truth had been revealed, and it was more devastating than any rumor. The man she thought was trapped in silence had chosen silence. He had chosen to let her suffer alone. And as Ella ran into the night, her heart shattered. She realized that the most painful betrayal was not the lie itself, but the trust it had destroyed. The night air struck Ella's face as she burst through the mansion doors, her steps carrying her away from the hall of applause and betrayal. The garden stretched out before her, roses glistening under moonlight, but she saw nothing. Her chest ached as if her heart had been torn open. Behind her, the echo of Alexander's voice lingered in her mind. He was never deaf. He had chosen silence, chosen secrecy, chosen to let her carry humiliation alone. The revelation cut deeper than any insult spoken by strangers. Her heels stumbled against the gravel path, but she did not care. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Why? Why would you do this to me?" Moments later, Alexander followed. His footsteps were firm, closing the distance. "Ella, please listen." His voice was strong, but to her it was unbearable. for every word reminded her of the deception. She spun to face him, her tears glistening. "Listen? I listened to your silence for weeks. I endured every cruel rumor, every accusation, while you hid behind a lie. Do you know what that did to me?" Her voice trembled, rising with years of buried pain. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I thought silence would protect me. I thought it would protect us." Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "Protect us? You call this protection? You turned me into a shield, a spectacle, a test of your pride. You never trusted me enough to tell me the truth." He reached for her arm, but she pulled back sharply. "Do not touch me. I was your wife only on paper, but I gave you dignity in public, and you repaid me with deceit." For the first time, his composure cracked. "Ella, I made mistakes, but I never wanted to hurt you." "Oh." She shook her head, her breath unsteady. "You already did. You made me believe you were helpless when you were not. You let me suffer so you could keep your secret. That is not love. That is cruelty." The silence that followed was heavier than any she had endured in the weeks before. The man who had once been an enigma now stood revealed, and yet he felt like a stranger more than ever. Finally, with a voice that shook, she whispered, "I cannot stay here. Not tonight. Not after this." "Oh." Without waiting for his answer, Ella turned and walked into the darkness of the garden, leaving Alexander standing alone beneath the moonlight. His voice called out once more, but she did not look back. In that moment, her heart was not just broken, it was hollow. What had begun as a contract of survival had twisted into a bond of betrayal, and though she did not know where her steps would carry her, she knew she could no longer endure within the walls of his silence. Ella left the mansion that night with nothing but the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. She stayed with her mother at St. Mary's Hospital, choosing the sterile quiet of hospital halls over the suffocating grandeur of Alexander's world. By her mother's bedside, she felt a fragile sense of peace, though it was clouded by sorrow. She whispered to her mother, "I thought I was strong enough, but his silence broke me." Meanwhile, Alexander faced the storm alone. The news of his revelation spread like fire. Headlines screamed, "The millionaire who lied to the world." Investors questioned his integrity, rivals sharpened their claws, and society turned their whispers toward him. The lie that had once protected him now threatened to destroy everything he had built. Yet the wound that cut deepest was Ella's absence. He walked the halls of the mansion, her sketchbook clutched in his hand. The drawing of his face stared back at him, every line etched with her quiet attention. He realized then that she had seen him more clearly in silence than anyone else ever had. And he had repaid her with pain. Determined to make amends, Alexander took his first public step. At a press conference flooded with cameras, he admitted everything. "I am not deaf," he said, his voice steady but heavy with remorse. "I allowed the world to believe a lie. I thought it would protect me from false friends and shallow alliances. But in doing so, I hurt the one person who never asked for anything but honesty. My wife is not a gold digger. She is the only one who gave me dignity when the world laughed at me. If anyone deserves shame, it is me." The statement shocked the public. Some condemned him, others admired his courage, but the story shifted. The target of ridicule was no longer Ella. She was no longer the so-called gold digger. She was the woman who had stood beside him in silence and bore the cruelty of others without defense. Ella saw the broadcast from her mother's hospital room. Her chest tightened as she watched him stand before the world, vulnerable in a way she had never imagined. For the first time, his actions matched the words she had begged for. He was no longer hiding, he was fighting. Days later, he appeared at the hospital unannounced. He did not come with cameras or guards. He came alone, holding the sketchbook she had left behind. Standing at the foot of her mother's bed, he placed it gently on the table. His eyes met Ella's, filled with exhaustion but also with something she had longed to see: humility. "I cannot undo what I have done," he said softly. "But I can choose differently now. I do not want a contract. I do not want silence. I want to fight for you, for us, with everything I have." Ella's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, yet her heart still trembled with fear. Could she trust him again? Could she risk her soul once more? She lowered her gaze, unsure of her answer. But in that moment, one truth became clear. Alexander was no longer hiding behind silence. He was choosing action. And for the first time, the future no longer felt like a prison, but a question waiting to be answered. The days that followed were quiet, but no longer with the heavy silence that once suffocated Ella. This time, it was a silence of choice, filled with the weight of decisions waiting to be made. She spent her mornings caring for her mother, her evenings sketching at the hospital window, and her nights wrestling with the memory of Alexander's words. When she returned to the mansion for the first time since the revelation, she found it changed. Reporters no longer gathered at the gates, the staff greeted her with gentler eyes, and within the great hall stood Alexander, waiting with none of his usual armor. He held her sketchbook in his hands as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. "Ella," he began, his voice carrying steady resolve, "I cannot ask you to forget what I did, but I can ask you to see what I am doing now. I ended the contract. There is no paper binding us anymore. If you stay, I want it to be because you choose me, not because you are trapped." Her breath caught as she looked at him. For the first time, there was no mask, no interpreter, no fortress of silence. Just a man stripped of pride, standing bare before her. Slowly, she approached him. "Do you understand what you cost me, Alexander? The dignity I lost? The pain I carried?" His eyes glistened, but his voice did not falter. "Yes, and I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of your forgiveness. Not through contracts, not through silence, through action." Her gaze fell on the sketchbook between his hands. He opened it, revealing the drawing of his face she had once tried to hide. "You saw me when I hid from the world," he said softly. "You gave me a truth no one else dared to give. I will not let that gift be wasted." "Oh." Ella's throat tightened, her heart warring between the fear of betrayal and the hope of something real. She thought of her mother's frail smile, her father's whispered encouragement, her own strength through endless storms. And then she thought of Alexander's hand catching her when she fell, his quiet purchase of her mother's medicine, his voice finally breaking the silence for her. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not from sorrow. She placed her hand over his, closing the sketchbook. "Then let us begin again. Not as a contract, not as a performance, as two people who choose each other." Relief broke across his face, a warmth she had never seen there before. He pulled her close, not with the formality of a staged embrace, but with the rawness of a man clinging to his second chance. In the days that followed, the mansion felt different. Laughter replaced whispers, shared dinners replaced empty halls, and every step Ella took no longer felt like a performance. The chains of obligation had fallen away, leaving only choice. Their story had begun as survival dressed in silk and silence. It ended with two hearts, choosing each other freely. And as Ella's voice narrated the final truth, it carried beyond the mansion walls. True love is not a contract. It is not silence. True love is a choice. And today, I choose him.